Now, a hidden housing crisis is continuing to affect hundreds of households here in County Clare, with many people in their 60s and 70s still struggling with mortgage arrears dating back to the financial crash. For some, the fear of losing their home has become a constant reality, stretching out over more than a decade. New figures suggest around 440 households in the county are in long-term arrears, with many cases now edging toward legal action. But, of course, behind those numbers are deeply personal stories, often marked by silence, stress, and families only discovering the scale of the problem years later. For more on this, I'm joined on the line by the CEO of Irish Homes, Stephen Curtis. Stephen, good morning to you.
Morning, how are you?
Very well, but slightly alarmed to hear about how many people out there are in this situation, which you've described as a silent crisis. From your perspective, I've given the numbers, around 440 households. How much does that fit the description widespread?
Well, I suppose it seems strange to be talking about something that really originated back in 2008 when we had the financial crisis, as you mentioned at the top. And there's people got into mortgage difficulty, and many people, lost jobs, lost businesses, and were affected very greatly by the financial crisis, but managed to restructure their situation or managed to resolve it over a period of time. And lots of people would have had that experience over 2010, 2011 and 2012. But what we are seeing is that there's people, and as the figure showed, there's about 440 households just in Clare alone that are in these long-term mortgage arrears where they haven't been able to resolve their difficulties. What we see is that there are typically people that have had a health issue, have had some sort of a relationship issue, or possibly have had both affect their lives, and they just haven't been able to get back up on their feet again. But time has gone on, and people that were in their 30s and 40s are now in their 50s and 60s, and the time available to them to try and resolve this issue and get themselves back on track is running out. And it's something that we as operators of the mortgage to rent scheme as being a substantial problem, and something that we want to try and bring awareness to, and then help try and find solutions to help people address this, which is what the mortgage to rent scheme does.
Yeah, and you've given the reasons as to, people, situations in their personal lives that have led to these scenarios, Stephen. But people hearing the age profile will be shocked. You assume, obviously incorrectly, that people in their 60s and 70s have either have their mortgage paid off or they're very close to it. And you've highlighted the shame and silence. Is that why many people who find themselves in this scenario feel unable to talk about their situation, because there is an assumption that this shouldn't be something that happens to someone of your age cohort?
I think that's right, and I think there's a few things in that. I think, first of all, people have tried their best to resolve the situation, and I suppose they're also doing it in the context that there's something else going on in their lives as well that they're usually trying to grapple with as well, and that they just haven't been able to resolve the mortgage issue. And what we're increasingly finding when we talk to people is that they simply don't have the funds available to go and restructure these loans, and they simply don't have an availability of cash that they can go to the bank and say, look, I can pay you X or I can pay you Y, and we can restructure this. And that's a very, very difficult situation. And I suppose it's like everything in life. If it goes on for long enough, you go, oh, I can't face dealing with that again. And I suppose what we're really trying to do is, first of all, highlight that this problem, it was very, very topical 8 or 9 years ago when the mortgage arrears crisis was much, much bigger. But that we're trying to highlight there are still people that are left in this really difficult situation. They're increasingly becoming an older cohort of people, and that a real push now needs to be made to try and find solutions for those people, and ultimately keep them in the houses that they're in the communities that they're in, and in the locations that they've brought up their families.
I'm thinking of not just these people, Stephen, but also their families, and I am sure there have to be situations or scenarios where adult children aren't aware of what's going on and perhaps only discover the issue later. I mean, how common is that, and what kind of impact does it have on families when this comes to light, and how do they respond?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, maybe it's an Irish thing. We like to kind of keep our problems to ourselves and try and sort them out ourselves. what we find is that often the family doesn't know a huge amount about it, or they might have a kind of a general awareness, but they may not be aware that it's maybe as bad as things are, or that it's as difficult as the situation is. And we find when we operate the mortgage to rent scheme and offer that as a solution to people, often we speak to people when we're going through the scheme, but they'd be saying, look, if you need to come out to the house, for example, to do a survey, can we do it at a particular time when other people mightn't be around and things like that? Now, look, we'd always be sensitive to what people want and try and facilitate that, but it's definitely something that people increasingly don't want to talk about. And what we're trying to, I suppose, raise awareness of this is to say, look, you don't need to go and tell everybody about it, but there are help and there are solutions and there are options available to people, and to encourage them really to explore them, to, I suppose, once and for all resolve this, and give them sort of security about their housing situation in the future.
And you've pointed earlier on to the mortgage to rent scheme as a key solution. Can you just expand on that, Stephen? How exactly it works?
Yeah, so the mortgage to rent scheme is a solution that we think works quite well actually for this older cohort of people, because what it does is it allows an older person or anyone who's eligible for the scheme to, instead of owning a house and paying a mortgage, they lose ownership of the house, but they get to stay in the house as a social housing tenant. So they'd stay as a tenant of Clare County Council. We buy the house, we renovate the house, and we provide it or lease it to Clare County Council on a long-term basis. And Clare County Council then in turn make that property available to that person leaving them there. And it allows people then to see out their retirement in the house that they know that they've lived in for 20 years. And it also allows them to pay a rent that's affordable. So if their income goes up, they pay a little bit more rent. But if their income goes down, the rent gets adjusted downwards as well in line with that, which we see as being very important for people that maybe, they might be retiring in 3 years' time and they're saying, well, actually, my income's going to go down quite a bit in 3 years' time. I need to try and future-proof for that. And it's a government scheme that has been operating for about 10 years. There's been the guts of 3,000 of them done. But what is increasingly becoming obvious is that people that are entering the scheme are becoming that older cohort of people. But it's to try and reach and talk to those people that are in these really, really difficult mortgage arrears situations to say this, along with other solutions, could resolve this for you once and for all. But reach out and try and get a bit of advice and guidance to decide what to do next, because it's unfortunately a situation that it's difficult to deal with, but the problem isn't going away unless people grab it.
And from what you've outlined there, Stephen, the mortgage to rent scheme sounds like a welcome escape route, and one that you would think people who find themselves in this very difficult situation would grab gratefully with both hands. However, I'm sure, and perhaps even in your experience, you've encountered people who maybe ultimately go down this route, but a significant hurdle is giving up ownership of their home, which is a huge step, particularly if you come from the older members of society who the expectation was you would own your own home. How difficult is that decision, though, in reality for people?
It is like you've hit the nail on the head. It's a big decision for anyone to make, to decide I'm going to give up relinquish ownership of my home here. What we find is that people have two things in their minds. Is the first thing is they have is, first of all, I want to have security about where I'm going to live and that I'm not facing a repossession or a situation where the bank are trying to take back the house. I suppose that's the first thing that people have in their mind, and the mortgage to rent offers a solution to that. The other thing that the scheme does is it gives people a route to buy back the house in the future. So after 5 years, if their situation changes or they're in a position to buy it back, or they come into an inheritance or whatever the case may be, they have an absolute right in the scheme to buy the property back. And we find that a lot of people, when they enter the scheme, they say, well, actually, I think in 5 or 6 years my situation will have improved and I'll be able to buy it back at that stage. And that's something everybody can do. It's not something that, we'd have to agree to or something like that. It's a right that's built into the scheme for people. And that kind of gives them the opportunity, if circumstances change, that they can buy back the property. Now, what we also then find is that when people get into it, they find actually, I don't have to worry about repairs and maintenance on the property, and I'm paying a rent that I can afford. So I probably don't want to buy it back for another while, but it's a big decision, and it's something that the scheme has built into it to give people, that route that they can buy the property back if they decide they want to do that or are in a position to do so in the future.
Do you feel there are enough supports in place through services like MABS?
I think MABS do a phenomenal job in fairness to the length and breadth of the country, and they've got offices in Clare, they've got offices in every county in Ireland, giving advice to people and giving them help. I think organisations like MABS can always do with a bit more help, but I think one of the things that we're really trying to raise awareness to people of is there are help available there's MABS, there's personal insolvency practitioners that are available to talk to people that are in this difficult debt situation about what their options might be, what might work for them, and to try and ultimately give them a bit of peace of mind. I think we can always try and do more to try and help people and to build that kind of awareness. And that's something that, we feel people can't go another 10 years without resolving this situation or this difficulty. And that's where working together between the likes of ourselves, MABS and others can help with that.
Just before I let you go, Stephen, I mean, in general, do you feel, even though, as you say, the mortgage to rent scheme is a vital solution in this scenario, do we need stronger intervention now to protect older homeowners in particular?
I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to look at older people and people that are entering into retirement as a specific cohort of people that need specific help and specific interventions to allow them to enjoy their retirement, that they're not looking over their shoulder or worried about the bank. And when we look at like every scheme and every situation in life, there's rules and guardrails that are put up around that. But I think for people that are entering into that retirement phase, we need to look at them as a very specific cohort of people and make sure that the guardrails that are there for schemes and things like this generally are appropriate for people that are older, and then also make sure that MABS and others, PIPs, etc., are tooled up then to help them. And I think everyone is pulling in the right direction. It's about really everyone working together to help this cohort of people that are in that very, very difficult position.
Okay, we appreciate you joining us on such an important issue. The CEO of Irish Homes, Stephen Curtis, thank you for joining us on the show this morning.
Thank you very much.